Hello and welcome to Tommy Surfs. Today we're going to be looking at the Channel Islands Dumpster Diver 2. Now this particular one I'm reviewing is 5'7" by 19 1/4 and 2 3/8, coming in at 27.8 liters. Now I'm 5'8" and I weigh 145 pounds. The Dumpster Diver 2 is obviously a remake of the original Dumpster Diver. And according to Channel Islands, they wanted to make something a little bit longer and modernize some of the parts. However, when I look at the dimensions and compare the old to the new, they look awfully similar. I mean, they definitely didn't go longer. So now here I marked everything in red that was bigger. So pause the video and then you can kind of compare the Dumpster Diver to the Dumpster Diver 2. In terms of concave, it's basically a single throughout. And as you saw, it started pretty far up on the nose, and it's a significant concave from the middle of the board all the way throughout the tail, and at the very end it's just flat out. Now let's look at the rocker, and we're going to compare the Dumpster Diver 2 to the mashup. And first we're going to look at the tail rocker, and mind you, we're only going to look at it in the simplest way possible, which is to kind of look at the elevation of the tail off the ground. And now here's a view of the nose, and because the Dumpster Diver 2 is actually 3 inches taller than the mashup, if you cut 3 inches off the nose of this board, it actually has less nose rocker than the mashup. Again, rockers are really nuanced. It's going to depend on where the flat section is and how it's laying on the floor, as well as the measurement of the curve. My measurements are pretty, the simplest way to look at it. And now looking at my first wave, you'll notice that I got in pretty easy even though it's super soft. And it's doing well to maintain speed. And here again, catches waves really easily, does nothing to like push water or anything weird. Now at this point I need to mention that I am surfing it as a 2+1 with the Naked Viking Orcas, which are very large fins. So now I'm going to say something very obvious, which is the board does better when the waves get punchy or bigger. And that's going to be true of probably 95% of the boards out there, right? But what I also found was that this board, if you put it on rail, goes a little bit better. But it's through the flat sections, and I don't know if you can see it, you'll notice that when I press on the tail, it seems to almost slip, and that's going to be because of 3 different reasons. 1, it's got a slightly more pulled in tail relative to the width of the board. 2, it's got a squash tail versus something like a swallow, which will have a little bit more projection. And 3, I'm riding it as a 2+1, and the stabilizer fin is kind of small. And so if you're too far back on the tail, it's going to just feel a little soft. So now to the contrary, once the waves have a little bit of steepness to it, the board has a great deal of projection. And once you have the speed, all the performance features of this board stand out and really shine. So now on this wave, after my first turn, you'll notice I stay as high as I can on the wrap. It's a small wave, but the reason is because I want to take advantage of the most vertical part of that wave. And now right here, you'll see me take a huge step back right before the maneuver. The board does really well to drive if you're forward on top of the front fins, and obviously pivots really well off the back fin. And here, another example of how well it maneuvers, as well as how well it does to project down the line when the wave has a little bit of steepness. And this one had a little steepness, so it had a really good pump section, and actually had a very good end section. So now I'm going to again say something obvious, which is with these more performance type shapes, like the FT, the FRK Plus, and the Dumpster Diver 2, I seem to do better on backhand. Maybe it's the longer rail line. So although classified as a performance groveler, I think for the intermediate surfer, the average daily surfer, this is going to be a pretty good performance board with a lot of grovel features. So now day 2 was a bigger day, but a tad soft. But the size made it to where it had enough push, and it actually had a decent inside section. So you'll see me kind of work through the outside and sometimes get a good finish on the inside. And to be honest, this is actually the perfect conditions for the type of reviews and testing that I like to do, because it really pushes the low end. of the scale. You know, you got Noel Solis with Surf and Show that surfs the pool and lowers, right? So you can kind of see what the boards will do in the better waves. There's guys like Dane Reynolds, you know, they're surfing up north, really punchy waves, just blasting massive airs. But an average guy in average conditions, maybe even subpar conditions, you know, how well does this board do? And this board is doing really well. In fact, this thing actually does well in the microwave conditions. So sub 1 foot, I found that provided you were standing in the right place, you could actually make it go. But the wave needed a little bit of a curve. So in the really small stuff, I would say that it's not as good as the mashup or the bobby quad. And I think those two boards have a slight advantage, and I'm talking very slight, because of the fact that they have their swallowtails. And, you know, anytime you press vertically down, it tends to squirt water straight back, okay? If you're using your rails, there isn't much difference. All three boards are really good. And actually, on rail, in the really small stuff, this is actually better than the bobby quad, just by a little. Now, one thing I absolutely have to mention is that on the top end, this will probably, more than likely, outperform both the mashup and the bobby quad. Probably not as good as the FT, but it's pretty up there. So now, one thing earlier I said about it having the stabilizer and that being one of the reasons why it felt a little soft, you know, if I was stepping too far back on the tail, I want to mention that I wanted to test it as a thruster. So I'm hoping to get it out this weekend, but I'm going to release this video before that. So maybe I'll put out a second video. At the least, I'll comment exactly how it went. Overall, I think this thing is excellent in regards to performance, especially for a average surfer like myself. In terms of grovel, it was great. I won't say excellent because I believe that if it were softer and small, it might be a little bit more difficult. So not quite as good as something with a wider tail. So I have nothing negative to say about this board other than the fact that it did take me 3 days to get used to it. And that could have been a combination of the fact that it's a squash tail and not a swallowtail that I'm used to. Currently, I've been surfing a lot of swallowtails. Also, I surfed it as a 2+1. And one thing about a 2+1 is you do have to shift your feet quite a bit. And if you look at my early footage, I wasn't doing that. And then as I got used to it, I was. So I hope you found this video to be informative and it helps in any type of decision making you do. I really like the board. It is a loaner, so I do have to give it back. So hopefully I'll get maybe another week on it. Now, I have a couple more waves that I do want to show, but while they're playing out, I kind of want to go over some housekeeping items. Now, one of the things I constantly mention is that, you know, for me, this is a kind of a losing game in terms of surf budget and then trying to afford these boards. So I had this idea of possibly starting a second channel that doesn't focus on surfing. But in order to monetize that, I got to get to 1,000 subs quickly. So if you do support this channel and you want to support me passively, it would be a tremendous help if you could follow the other channel to get me, you know, to monetize capabilities right away. What I'll focus on there are things like camping and other things where my audience is going to be a lot bigger than surfing. So that will be hopefully the means by which I will fund this channel, and I can get, you know, more relevant boards out to you quicker as they come out versus, you know, doing them 6 months to a year down the line when, you know, other people are willing to lend it to me, or I'm picking up used boards. So I hope you enjoyed everything. Please like, subscribe if you haven't already, and until the next one. Oh, almost forgot. One last thing. Wax your board. Always remember to wax your board.